A black woman was erased from the guest list, but her billionaire husband made them regret it. Under the golden, luxurious lights of the Belmont Hotel in Chicago, once ranked by Architectural Digest as one of the top 5 most powerful event venues in the Midwest, a black woman stepped into the grand lobby. Her name was Bambaina, around 38 years old, tall, with composed eyes, dressed in a classic black Dior gown worth over $6,200. Her hair was neatly tied up in a bun, revealing a graceful neckline. In her hand, she held a formal invitation, gold embossed, clearly displaying her name, along with the private insignia of the Lucentis Corporation. That evening's event was no ordinary party. It was Lucentis's annual charity gala, where CEOs, investors, politicians, and outstanding figures gathered. More importantly, just 48 hours earlier, Bambaina's husband, Mr. Sylvester Callaway, CEO of Sterling Ventra Holdings, had signed a $480 million strategic agreement with Lucentis, marking the beginning of an unprecedented era of cooperative growth between the two corporations. Yet at the reception desk, amid the soft strings playing in the background and the delicate clinking of champagne glasses, an insult began to take form. Fiona, the greeter, around 27 years old, white, dressed in a black uniform with an earpiece in one ear, glanced at Bambaina's invitation and then skimmed through the digital guest list on her iPad. She squinted, looked up, and said indifferently, "Sorry, but your name isn't on the guest list." Not an explanation, not a hint of hesitation, just a flat denial of her presence. Bambaina frowned. "I'm the wife of Mr. Sylvester Callaway. We received this invitation together." Fiona didn't blink. "I'm afraid that may be a mistake, but I must ask you to leave the priority area until we can verify." She gestured toward a nearby security guard, a large man in a black suit, who began approaching as if handling an intruder. Heads began to turn. A few female guests whispered. A white couple in tuxedos passed by and sneered. All of this happened within just 2 minutes and 37 seconds, according to the security footage that would later be revealed. Bambaina didn't argue. She stood tall, her gaze still calm, and simply asked, "May I call my husband?" Fiona hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. "If he's as important as you say he is." And in that exact moment, with a single phone call, the situation began to shift. But not merely because of a husband's anger. It was because of what that woman had endured, had once been dismissed for, had once kept silent about, and what others were about to face for daring to erase her name. A name that, while seemingly easy to delete from a digital screen, was etched deeply into the history of finance, humanitarian efforts, and the kind of quiet power no one in that room had anticipated, because they had no idea. Bambaina wasn't just the wife of a billionaire. She was the very reason Sylvester became one. If you've enjoyed this story so far, take a moment to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next gripping, powerful tale from Black Strength Stories. She stood there, in the hotel lobby flooded with light, like a blot of ink on the perfect white paper of the elite. Bambaina said nothing more. She quietly glanced at the Cartier watch on her wrist, a 10th wedding anniversary gift from Sylvester, worth nearly $60,000, then turned and walked away, her Louboutin heels clicking softly but steadily. No one stopped her. No one saw her off. Everyone was too busy with wine and the artificial glow of grandeur. The September wind was cold on the steps outside. Bambaina didn't summon a limousine as usual. She opened her phone and booked an Uber Black. The driver was an African-American man, about 50 years old, named Roy. When he saw the name Bambaina Callaway on his app, he briefly glanced in the rearview mirror. "Is it really you?" "Ma'am?" She gave a faint smile. Not tonight. The phone in her hand flashed the message. Call failed. Sylvester, at that moment, was standing on a podium on the 3rd floor in the Sapphire Ballroom, addressing over 300 guests, including the mayor of Chicago, representatives of international organizations, and dozens of CEOs. No one knew that while he raised his glass and said, "I couldn't have done this without Bambaina, the one who always reminded me that compassion is stronger than any investment." The very woman he spoke of was sitting in the back seat of a car, her eyes gazing distantly at the misty shoreline of Lake Michigan in the night. When she returned to the penthouse on the 63rd floor of the magnificent Mile, where the oak floors were smooth as silk and the glass walls revealed the entire city, she didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't accuse. Bambaina simply removed each accessory from her body, slowly and in silence. The black dress was hung up as though there had never been a party. The Chanel clutch sat slightly ajar, revealing the printed invitation, her name bolded. She placed the invitation on the table beside a pair of South Sea pearl earrings, the first wedding gift from Sylvester, bought during their honeymoon in Kyoto. A short message was sent, no exclamation marks, no capitalized emphasis. "When you finish your speech, I will no longer be there." As the city lights began to dim, Bambaina stepped out onto the balcony, the breeze lifting the edge of her light gray nightgown. Behind her, on the bookshelf, was a manuscript titled "The Value of a Name," a draft she had been working on. No one knew she had once been the strategic coordinator for 3 United Nations humanitarian relief campaigns. No one wanted to remember because she was a black woman without a personal brand. Not a singer, not a loud activist, just a silent name. And that was exactly what made them believe they could erase her from a list. When the final round of applause echoed beneath the Swarovski chandeliers of the Sapphire Ballroom, Sylvester gave a slight bow and stepped down from the podium. The most sought-after black billionaire in sustainable finance had just delivered a keynote speech, ending with an emotional tribute to the wife no one had seen. He hurried outside, pulling out his phone to call his personal assistant, Noel, with one single question. "Where is Bambaina?" Noel froze. "I thought she was already inside. She wasn't on the guest list, Mr. Sylvester." A chill ran down Sylvester's spine. He immediately ordered the guest list to be rechecked. Next to the name Bambaina Calloway, which was printed in bold and marked in red, was a scribbled note in pen. Unable to verify, no valid ID, not accompanying primary guest. No one had asked him about it. No one had cross-checked. No one had even considered that a black woman arriving alone could possibly be the wife of the guest of honor at the most prestigious event in Chicago that night. He demanded the lobby security footage be reviewed. 27 minutes and 14 seconds. That was how long Bambaina stood waiting at the reception desk, rejected and ignored. She didn't cause a scene, didn't react, just stood there, then quietly turned away. No one from the reception team reported the incident. No one thought it mattered. To them, Bambaina was a guest who didn't meet the standards. Sylvester didn't stay at the gala. He left the Belmont Hotel still in his suit, without even changing, abandoning all the partners waiting to sign the official contracts, leaving behind the spokesperson preparing the press release, ignoring the invitation to the Davos Economic Forum that had just landed in his inbox. When he opened the glass door on the 63rd floor, he stepped into a space as silent as a museum. The 320-square-meter penthouse held no music, no footsteps. On the marble table near the window sat a pair of pearl earrings, the only symbol of her presence. Bambaina had left nothing behind but a void that had clearly been arranged. A book with a folded page, an unsealed letter, and Sylvester's printed speech, with one line underlined by her hand. No one gets left behind. Sylvester did not sit. He stood, eyes fixed on the earrings. Then he turned and called Noel. His voice was low, not raised, not breaking, but unmistakably firm. Call a meeting with the entire organizing team, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Not online, in the executive room. The more people, the better. Noel tried to object, but there was no room for advice. Sylvester cut him off. I didn't build an empire just for my wife to be erased from a list. If they can't recognize her worth, I'll make sure this entire city remembers her name another way. And so that night, Chicago didn't yet know it had awakened a storm. But this storm didn't scream. It was silent, sharp, and left no path for retreat. At 7:15 the next morning, on the 51st floor of the Elysium Tower, headquarters of Lucentis Corporation, a meeting took place under a thick, heavy atmosphere. No journalists, no assistants, no legal teams present. Only two men. Sylvester Calloway and Reuben Vance, CEO of Lucentis, who just the night before had been raising champagne glasses at what was dubbed the economic symphony of the winter season. Sylvester walked into the room without shaking hands, without taking a seat. He pulled out a thick folder bound in black leather. "I'm not here for an explanation," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I'm here to deliver a statement." Inside the folder was an official contract to withdraw the entire $480 million investment from the three-phase joint venture project with Lucentis, including logistics infrastructure, an AI-driven supply chain, and a green tech startup fund. The sole reason was clearly stated in Clause 4.1. Due to a corporate environment that lacks the basic capacity to protect the dignity of women of color. Reuben Vance turned pale. He began to explain something about system failure, about oversight in the guest verification process. But Sylvester cut him off with a slow hand gesture. No system fails 3 times with the same group of people. That's not an error. That's a choice. Less than 24 hours later, Lucentis's internal report was leaked. An investigative piece by the Chicago Tribune confirmed. Fiona Gervais, the receptionist that evening, had previously been the subject of 3 complaints over the past 2 years at corporate events for refusing service to guests of color. In all 3 cases, the complaints had been dismissed with the note, "Insufficient clear video evidence." Sylvester didn't wait for the system to correct itself. He directly negotiated and acquired a 17% stake in Meridian Impact Group, the event management firm behind Lucentis's event series. The deal was signed within 11 days, under one condition: the right to reappoint the entire senior leadership team. On day 12, the CEO, COO, and head of guest management at Meridian simultaneously received termination notices. Fiona Gervais was dismissed under the clause of serious violation of senior guest conduct protocol. In reality, it was the softest way to avoid a class action lawsuit. The media caught fire. CNBC described the incident as a moral jolt to the new face of capitalism, where ethics are now part of investment metrics. The hashtag number CALLOWAYCLAUSE began trending on LinkedIn as more CEOs pledged to include minority dignity protection clauses in their joint venture contracts. But just when everyone assumed Sylvester had retaliated, something unexpected happened. Bambaina, the woman who had quietly walked out of the hotel lobby that night, never made a public statement. No press appearances, no posts on social media, no interviews granted. There was only a small handwritten note passed to Meridian's executive board, written in slanted script, signed Bambaina Calloway. The words were simple: Honor doesn't lie in a seat at the banquet. It lies in how you walk away and how you return without needing an apology. And for Sylvester, he knew this wasn't the end, because the woman he loved wasn't seeking vengeance. She wanted to change the way the world values a black woman, not by the invitation she holds, but by the character she carries. 1 month after the incident at the Belmont Hotel, while the public was still reeling from the sudden shakeups in the executive boards of major corporations, Bambaina Calloway appeared. Not on a magazine cover, not through an exclusive media interview, but on the stage of a small TEDx event held at the Chicago Auditorium Theater, the same venue where Michelle Obama had once given her first speech as a student. The event was initially expected to draw just over 800 attendees. But within 48 hours of the speaker lineup being announced, the number of registrations surged to 2,600. Organizers had to set up separate live streams in 2 additional halls and host replay screenings at 3 satellite venues across the city. Her talk was titled, "The Silent Woman with the Loudest Room." When she stepped onto the stage, Bambaina wasn't wearing haute couture or any luxury brand. She wore a plain white shirt, soft black trousers, her hair tied low. No earrings, no jewelry. She stood in the simple lighting and began with a sentence that brought the entire hall to silence. "I'm not here to retell a story someone once tried to erase. I'm here because I know there are hundreds of people in this room who've also been erased. From lists, from meetings, from someone's life, just because you didn't fit the atmosphere." Bambaina didn't talk about the hotel night. Not once did she mention Lucentis or Fiona. She spoke of the times she'd been quietly removed from community projects in the Bronx, where she had worked as an educational advisor. She spoke of being 27 and removed from the organizing committee of a business forum simply because no one on the board knew anyone with a name like that. And then she looked straight into the live stream camera and said, "My name is Bambaina, and if you don't know how to pronounce it, you don't have to say it. Just remember that I stood here." Within just 5 days, the 17-minute video had garnered 8.3 million views on YouTube, shared by countless influential figures such as Ava DuVernay, Viola Davis, Oprah, and even former President Barack Obama, who wrote, "She didn't need to shout to cause an earthquake. She just needed to stand still." On social media, a wave spread. The hashtag #, "We Are All Bambaina," emerged as a declaration of solidarity. Tens of thousands of women of color shared stories of being erased from project teams, from speaker lists, from roundtables they themselves had built from the ground up. And it wasn't just women. Many in the LGBTQ+ community, people of Asian descent, people with disabilities, and those who had experienced homelessness also used the hashtag as a call for connection. From a TEDx talk that never mentioned the word victim, it became a symbol that no one needs to be called on, as long as you leave your own mark. 1 week later, the speech was selected as official material for multicultural training programs at 9 major universities, including Yale, Stanford, and Spelman College. The organization Equality Forward awarded Bambaina the Voice of the Year honor, even though she had never actually raised her voice. But for Sylvester, it was the first time he saw his wife step into the light, not as an extension of him, but as her own entity, strong, unrepresented by anyone else. And what brought him to tears wasn't the views or the awards, but a sentence she wrote after the talk on a small piece of paper left in their bedroom. "I don't need an apology. I just need to be remembered by my real name." That was when he knew. The price society would have to pay didn't come from the power he wielded. It came from the presence of Bambaina, one that could no longer be erased. On May 17th, exactly 1 year after the night Bambaina was turned away at the Belmont Hotel reception desk, Lucentis Group's annual investment conference was once again held at that very location. But no one, not the organizers nor the board of shareholders, could have predicted that the person opening the event that day would not be a CEO, not a strategic investor, but the very woman who had once been erased. Bambaina was not invited under the title Wife of Billionaire Sylvester. She came as the founding director of the Equal Access Initiative, a non-profit organization she had co-founded with 4 other women of color following the incident at Belmont. In less than 12 months, the initiative had raised $11.4 million, hosted more than 53 workshops, and provided free legal assistance to over 600 women and minority professionals in the finance sector. Individuals who had once been denied opportunities simply because of their names, their race, or their background. As she stepped into the main hall, the amber lights no longer cast a dim glow as they had a year ago. This time, her name was printed in bold on the program. The very first line, Keynote Speaker, Bambaina Calloway, founder of EAI, advocate for dignity in corporate structures. She wore an ivory white suit, minimalist in design, without any logos. She arrived without an entourage, and when she stepped onto the stage, she paused for a few seconds, right at the spot where, a year earlier, a velvet rope had blocked her path, where Fiona had once stopped her with the words, "Sorry, you're not on the list." The crowd fell silent. Many of them had been present the year before. Some were executives who had shaken Sylvester's hand, but never looked at Bambaina. Some were former Lucentis employees, now working at companies where her foundation sponsored scholarships or provided training programs. Bambaina said nothing about last year. She did not speak of anger, of pain, or of injustice. She began with a quiet truth. We don't lack chairs in rooms like these. We lack people willing to pull up a chair for someone else. Sylvester sat in the front row, wearing a charcoal gray suit, no tie. When the camera panned to him, he simply nodded, subtly, with deep respect. There was no attempt to take the spotlight, because he understood. Today was not the stage of the wealthy. It was the stage of the one who had once been forced to turn away in silence. The speech lasted 12 minutes. No embellishment, no call for donations. Bambaina simply told stories she had gathered over the past year, from a legal assistant who was pressured to change her name to make it easier to pronounce, to an African-American Harvard student told to dress more modestly during her internship so she wouldn't make her boss uncomfortable. Each story was a glimpse into an invisible system where no names needed to be crossed out because they were never written down in the first place. And then, as she closed, she looked directly at the audience, her gaze steady, her voice not raised, but every word clear. I don't need anyone to invite me in, but I know that if I'm not here, no one will mention the names that were once left behind. The hall rose to its feet, not out of trend, but out of instinct. It was a respect that did not come from power, but from the journey of a person who forced society to acknowledge her existence, even when it had once tried to erase it. From that day on, Bambaina became a name that could no longer be overlooked at any high-level corporate event in Chicago. But the remarkable thing was, she didn't appear often. She chose only a few events each year, places that needed the presence of someone who had once been denied entry, not for vengeance, but to hold the door open for someone else to walk through. Less than a year after the incident at the Belmont Hotel, the ripple effect of Bambaina's story had gone far beyond anyone's expectations. The Equal Access Initiative, originally launched as a personal, reactive gesture, had now become one of the fastest-growing nonprofit organizations in the field of social equity in the United States. The total donations in its first 12 months reached $32.4 million, with 41% of that coming from black female entrepreneurs, women who had long endured in silence within cold boardrooms. 1/3 of the funds came from small contributions, under $500, mostly from students, civil servants, and teachers. Evidence that resonance can rise from those seemingly without a voice in the system. The foundation had funded 80 startups across 9 states, from Georgia to Washington. Among them, 52% were led by individuals who had faced workplace discrimination, many of whom had been victims of incidents that never made headlines. One standout enterprise was Melanin Market, an e-commerce platform connecting consumers with Black-owned brands. Within just 6 months, the platform had attracted over 200,000 users and received a buyout offer from Amazon, but they declined. Bambaina did not attend the announcements. No ribbon cuttings, no press statements. She only appeared during the foundation's internal meetings, where she spent hours reading through financial reports and handwritten grant applications. She returned submissions that lacked clear financial planning, requesting revisions. And she personally handwrote letters to the selected applicants, always beginning with the same line: "We do not fund pity. We invest in resilience." Time magazine could not ignore the phenomenon. In its March issue, they dedicated the entire cover to Bambaina, with the bold headline, "The Ghost on the Guest List. Now the name at the table." The now iconic photo was taken in a white-lit room. Bambaina sat alone at a long round table, wearing a cream sweater, with no heavy makeup and no shimmering lights. She didn't look at the camera, but down at the teacup in her hands, her head slightly tilted, as if listening to a conversation within herself. It wasn't the image of an activist. It was the image of a symbol that doesn't need to shout for others to fall silent and listen. In the accompanying article, journalists described her as the woman who made the entire corporate events industry rewrite their guest protocols. According to insider sources, major PR firms in New York had updated their front desk training guidelines, now including the clause, "No one should assume a guest doesn't belong just because they don't look familiar." Universities, from Howard to Princeton, began incorporating Bambaina's story into coursework on equity in leadership and silent influence theory. But she didn't show up to class, didn't speak as a guest lecturer. When invited, she simply sent a single A4 sheet, handwritten in black ink, with one line: "Sometimes, the greatest impact doesn't come from a voice, but from a presence no one dares to overlook." Bambaina never needed an invitation to prove her presence, because from now on, wherever injustice hides behind silence, her name surfaces automatically, without the need for anyone to print an invitation. Fiona Carville, former front desk manager at the Belmont Hotel, once believed she was merely following protocol. But when her name began appearing repeatedly under the hashtag, "The Gatekeeper Gone Wrong," every layer of excuse, shielding indifference began to fall away. She wasn't hated for a single act, but for repeated patterns of subtle bias that had existed silently for far too long. After being terminated by the newly appointed executive board, handpicked by Sylvester, Fiona disappeared from social media for 2 weeks. When she returned, she posted a 9-minute video on YouTube, beginning with an apology, but quickly shifting into a series of justifications. "I was just following the system's instructions. No one told me she was a VIP guest." The video attracted 43,000 views within 24 hours, but more than 83% of the feedback was dislike. Public opinion was unforgiving. The comments under the video were a series of questions Fiona couldn't answer. Why were 3 other white guests without names on the list still allowed through? Why did your gaze focus only on women of color? If the system was flawed, why did it never fail for those who looked like you? Within 2 months, Fiona applied to 6 other hotels. all rejected her. One of the HR responses leaked online stated, "We need people who understand the difference between policy and prejudice." The press began asking, how many more Fionas exist in the hospitality industry? In an independent survey conducted by the organization Hospitality Now, with 2,100 front desk employees, up to 27% admitted to feeling uncomfortable when receiving black customers who were modestly dressed or spoke with a Southern American accent. Of those, only 8% had ever received formal training on unconscious bias. Fiona, after several months of silence, tried to work at a private event center in Charlotte. But after just 3 weeks of probation, she was let go following a client complaint that her smile wasn't offered equally to everyone. A former colleague who once worked with Fiona at the Belmont wrote a lengthy blog post recounting, "She never directly insulted anyone, but her eyes had grammar. And for black guests, it was always a negative sentence." Fiona's name no longer appeared on payrolls, but it was remembered as a textbook example of arrogance legitimized by petty power. A list, a nod, a filtering glance. The media dubbed her the gatekeeper without a key. On a podcast interview about exclusion culture, the host delivered a line that went viral. She didn't lose her job because of one decision. She lost her future because of an entire attitude. But perhaps the most telling image was a candid photo taken at a job fair in Denver. Fiona, wearing a wrinkled white blouse, standing at a booth handing out job applications. No more scrutinizing gaze, just a distant look in her eyes, as if she had finally understood. Sometimes arrogance doesn't make you bigger. It simply exposes the smallest part of who you are. No more stage lights, no more hashtags, no more magazine covers or glamorous conferences. Bambaina, the woman once erased from the guest list of her own husband's party, now quietly does what she believes matters most, connecting wounded young people with those in power, and doing so in silence. Once a month, at major universities like Howard, Spelman, NYU, and UCLA, she organizes unrecorded, media-free conversations. There is no stage. She selects a room that seats no more than 20 people, students of color who have been denied internships, questioned by professors for achievements that seemed too good to be true, or who walked out of interviews with dignity in their eyes, but nothing in their hands. These gatherings don't begin with a speech. They begin with a handwritten question. What part of this system made you feel like you didn't belong? And right there, Bambaina doesn't stand. She sits beside them, eye level, notebook in hand, never interrupting. Occasionally she nods, or asks a question like, if that person were sitting here today, what would you want them to understand? It is this silence that makes people speak their truths. A third-year law student at Georgetown once broke down in tears, recounting how his advisor summoned him to the office just to ask whether he had cheated on an exam, because his score was higher than the class average. A young woman studying finance at Michigan shared that she was denied an internship for having conduct not suited to the banking environment, though no one ever explained what that meant. At the end of each session, Bambaina says only one sentence. If you've ever felt invisible, know that I'm building a place where that will never happen again. After each conversation, she sends a private report, not public, to the HR directors of more than 27 companies within the Equal Access Initiatives network. These reports contain no student names, only patterns of issues, bias in interviews, judgments based on speech, vague descriptions of cultural fit. The companies are required to respond with action, revising interview procedures, adding oversight panels to hiring, and launching internal mentorship programs specifically for minority employees. No one posts photos of Bambaina at those sessions, but within corporate circles, a new phrase began appearing in meeting notes. How do we prevent another Bambaina incident? Not out of fear of scandal, but because everyone understood that if one woman's silence could shift an entire industry, then a company's indifference could erase the reputation it had spent years trying to build. Sylvester was always the one who picked her up after those sessions. He parked at the far end of campus, never stepping into the conversation. She once told him, "You don't need to speak for me anymore. I've already made the world stop and listen." That was the first time Sylvester, the man who had signed $100 million deals, understood that the greatest power doesn't lie in words, but in the unwavering presence of someone who doesn't need to be invited, yet can no longer be overlooked. 3 years had passed since the night Bambaina was erased from the guest list of one of the biggest financial events in Chicago. And in those 3 years, not once did she attack anyone. Not once did she sue. Not once did she call out names on social media. Yet in those same 3 years, countless financial corporations, investment firms, and prestigious universities were forced to rewrite policies, programs, and approaches to human engagement because of one woman who had once been left outside the door. On April 9th in Washington, D.C., Bambaina stepped onto the honor stage during the Congressional Civil Honor Award ceremony, the highest civilian award granted by the United States Congress, reserved only for individuals with extraordinary contributions to the advancement of social equity. It was the first time in the award's 136-year history that someone unaffiliated with any political office or public title was given this honor solely as a citizen who had made a positive impact on the nation. She came alone. No security, no media team, no escort vehicles. Only an ivory Aodai was designed by a student who had once received a scholarship from the Equal Access Initiative. She drove herself to the venue and parked in the guest lot. The only person accompanying her was a young woman, her new assistant, a former hotel receptionist who had lost her job after reporting internal racial discrimination. When the MC invited her to speak after receiving the award, she simply smiled. Then she walked straight to the microphone, looked down at a small paper crumpled at the corners in her purse. Her voice was calm, steady. "There is no speech today. I just want this sentence engraved on the certificate. To all those who were ever told, your name isn't on the list. We don't need a name tag. We just need dignity." There was no thunderous applause as usual, but the entire room stood. Some eyes welled with quiet tears. There were veteran politicians, backstage workers, even recent college interns. Everyone followed the figure of that small woman stepping off the stage without looking back. Back home, Bambaina placed the medal in a drawer. She didn't hang it. She sat with Sylvester on their apartment balcony, gazing out at Lake Michigan. He handed her a cup of hot tea. They didn't talk about the award. They talked about opening a new branch of the initiative in New Orleans. A week later, a journalist who attended the ceremony wrote on the front page of the Washington Post, "There are people who don't need to be invited to prove their worth. Their absence alone makes the whole room feel smaller. Her name, Bambaina, didn't need a business card, didn't need a title. Because in this world, sometimes, those who don't appear on the nameplate are the ones who lead. The ones who were once erased, but chose never to let anyone be erased again. There are stories that don't need to shout to be great. There are people who don't need to be honored on name tags, because their silence shook an entire system." Bambaina didn't knock. She didn't plead. She didn't argue. She walked away, and in that very step, she made the world stop and turn back. Not because she was a billionaire's wife, but because she was a woman who knew her worth and would never allow anyone to redefine it because of her skin or some invisible bias. Bambaina's story doesn't end with a rejected party invitation. It begins at the very place where they tried to push her out. And from there, a system was rewritten, not through threats, but through unwavering, undeniable action. What do you think? Can a woman once dismissed truly change how the world defines presence? Leave a comment below. We want to hear your story. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story on Black Strength Stories.